Well, hello and welcome to my cellar. I'm chuffed. Great little British term about pumped up, psyched, excited about the new Rings thing on Amazon Prime. Just got done watching the first two. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything like that, but I got to make a couple of comments because it was pretty damn cool. Let's see. I just took a few notes. I gotta have one of those elven torches. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. If you haven't, you will when you see it. Galadriel, who we know from the other books, is one badass lady in her youth. Whoa! The Harfoots. Predecessor to the Hobbits, I'm sure. Masters of camouflage. Now, what I don't get is the soldiers, the elven soldiers, they walk around with these really badass looking bows. Carry 6 or 7 arrows? That's it? My heavens, that is confidence in your archery. Guess that's why they have so much easier to hit in role-playing, huh? Let's see. Oh, here's another one. Elf something. Can't read that note I took. Probably scribbling it while something was going on. Their concept of crossing over to the other side, going to Valinor, Elf Heaven. Man, that was creepy. And the dwarves are certainly different than what anybody that has gone before. I really am enjoying the dwarves, and delightful to say that none of the dwarf women have beards, though they do have some pretty elaborate hairstyles. Watch it. It's great. Okay. And I understand one further comment. I understand why they dropped the first two. The first one is a little slow getting off the ground because they're trying to introduce so many strings to weave into the plot and the storyline. But it picks up about halfway through the first one, starts getting a lot more interesting, and then really grabs you by the earlobes on the second one. I'm looking forward to new ones. It says Friday nights. That might mean there's another one tomorrow night. Holy cow. All right. Some online browsing through some incredible parallels to my brought some incredible parallels to my attention. To the best of your knowledge, was Marvel's Secret Witch one of the Scarlet Witch, one of the inspirations behind Anti-Clerics? No. Now, I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, Gary wasn't a comics guy, nor was Brian, to my knowledge. Gary respected comics as an art form, and he'd enjoyed them when he was earlier, but he'd gotten into science fiction and fantasy, and that's where his interest lay. Now, Anti-Clerics were like everything else. After the game had been out for a little while and people had played it and that, they started stretching the framework. Anti-Paladins, and I'm not in any chronological order here. Anti-Paladins are a classic case in point. Here's this super duper good guy, and then there's Grond, to name somebody from the old Phineas strip. People wanted to know, what was the, a heal spell. Okay, how do you reverse that and make it like a rot spell or a fester spell or something? And that's where players and some of the guys and girls, though sadly it was mostly guys in those very early days, they were just reversing everything. And if you could heal somebody, you could curse them or poison them, or do the opposite. Now that gets really tricky if you get into physical components and what Eye of Newton, Tail of Dog, and all that kind of stuff. If you start getting into that, then you gotta come up with some. You gotta come up with some opposites, and that's only assuming that you have a prerequisite already established in your campaign, which is, oh my God, more detail than I'd ever want to go into. So, I mean, everything wanted to be an anti this, anti that. Snakes to sticks, sticks to snakes. All right, and I think that's a good classic example of opposites. And it was just a teething stage that the game went through. And of course, you could have Anti-Clerics because the pulp novels were rife with twisted priests and acolytes and what have you. So of course you had to allow for that because that's what D&D was all about. All the great things from all the good novels and stories and short stories and all the stuff published in the pulp zines. I ran a basic D&D game with a young player. He enjoyed the adventure, but his character died at the end. Before we quit, he rolled up a new character with great stats, and he's now trying to get another adventure for next time. Thanks, Tim. You're welcome. Sounds like you christened a gamer. He died, rolled up another one before he went home, and says, okay, when do we play again? Good. Keep feeding that enthusiasm. And do it, do it, you'll know how to do it. Okay, and I like to read the interesting ones, warts and all. I enjoy hearing your thoughts and philosophies, don't always agree, but I appreciate your perspective and your experience. Well, I'm glad you don't always agree. The more changes the owners make to modern D&D, the less appeal the new form has for me. I started playing and refereeing in 1976. Wow, that was long time ago. I'm only a little more senior than that. And my search for the perfect game rules for me and my table is finding the past. Okay, and in my search for the perfect game rules, we're finding the past far more fruitful than ideas than to the present. Okay, it's not written out real good. Anyway, they're saying that they're getting better ideas and stuff from the way game was played than the way it is played now. And I'm glad that D&D has a wider following now, but I strongly believe that as a game, it was much richer in earlier incarnations that encouraged referee and players coming up with the ideas and solutions from their own imaginations, rather than doctrinal ones coming from the rule book. Oh, yes, indeed. I can see you have been baptized in the Church of Curmudgeon. Yes, I agree. Again, if people are playing playing the later editions and they're having fun, I'm okay with that. I'm not anybody to say that I could. What would it mean if I wasn't okay with it? I want people to have fun. And if they're having any form of D&D, that's fine. I'll bet Abner Doubleday doesn't worry whether it's the major leagues, the minor leagues, softball, ladies softball, mixed league, church softball, or little league, or t-ball. It's all the game that he came up with all long time ago. Not that he came up with all by himself, because I know the stories, but he codified and spun all the aspects together and came up with something. So, yeah, I kind of look at it like that. But yeah, I'm all about player and DM latitude. I'm all about thinking outside the box, and I'm always open to outside the box solutions. Because after all, it's almost always the dice are almost always the arbiter. I may set the requirement needed, but the dice giveth and the dice taketh away. Next question, new question. Do you think a balance of puzzle encounters and combat encounters in a dungeon adventure would be important for new players? Yes. Few puzzles. But here's the thing about puzzles for new players. If you can come up with a clever puzzle, now that's however you define. Sorry, I got an itch. That's however you define clever. If you're into puns and word plays and that, or whatever's clever. Not terribly hard. I mean, it's got to have an answer. It's got to have a solution. But the thing about puzzles, especially early in an adventure, and also early in a player's history, is that successfully solving puzzles grants confidence. And confidence is very important, particularly with early stage players, one's very new to the game, because confidence breeds success and an affection for the game, enjoying the game, liking the game. We're all more confident doing things that we enjoy and or think that we do well. I'm not saying making a puzzle a day, every other room, spin the wheel and solve the question. No. But and here you can even lift something from a possibly common source of some sort as a puzzle, as a describe a trap that somebody at the table is likely to have seen in a movie or something like that, and then when they successfully navigate the problem, they'll be more confident when faced with the next circumstance or situation. So I think you should have a couple, particularly early. Let the puzzles point the way to go in furtherance of the adventure. Solving the puzzles gives valuable clues. Have you ever given a thought to running a seminar game at GaryCon? Well, I run games at GaryCon. I run the Wheel of Blame 4 or 5 times, or others to teach people to play OD&D. I know it's probably not your thing, but I would be interested to have an original teach the old school game the way it was meant to be. No, I'll take issue to that word meant. I don't preach that my way is the right way or anything of that nature. God forbid. And if I ever get like that, I'm sure, if I ever get to behaving like that, I'm sure my wife will give me a good swift smack up the back of the head, give me a denozo, and snap me out of it. The way it used to be played, yes. In the early days when, quite frankly, those early days were, if you want a good metaphor, the Wild West. we play rootin' tootin' D&D, however we want to, and the world was our oyster. The horizons were wide open, and we had great rollicking fun because there weren't a bunch of guidelines and rules and stuff hemming us in. I'm extremely hesitant to go to Luke or anybody else on my own and say, "Hey, Luke, I think I ought to give a." Now, if a convention came to me, as Gary Kahn did once several years ago when I did that 2-hour recorded thing, and said, "Hey, we'd like you to do this," then I might consider doing something like that. But I'm not preaching the school of Tim or Cascoid or the Curmudgeon. None of those are, lurking as icons. This is how I explain the way it used to be. I do a once a month for my top level Patreon subscribers, and if you want to have a Q&A every month on Zoom, on my Zoom channel, become a Patreon subscriber, and I do it once a month, and we talk about whatever. But for me to go to them and say, "I think you need me to," no, And I'm real picky about who I sit on panels with, because I've sat on panels with people that didn't let anybody else talk. And it's a couple, 3 different people I'm thinking of. So anyway, no. And then someone else came in and they'd like to second that expression. Love to see and hear. Well, okay. Do a Patreon. The highest level is $9 a month, and you get an unfiltered and once a month, and you get a Q&A. You invite to a Q&A session once a month on the final Saturday of the month, I believe it is. And person who put that one in, please do not put emojis into the comments. When I try to cut and paste them, it just blows up the layout all over the place, because the emojis come in bigger than baseball cards, for God's sakes, in comparison to the rest of the text. Next one. Love the new intro. Or is it an older one and I just now noticed it? Well, I haven't done anything within the last several weeks, so you may have just noticed it, if you're talking about the skeletal dinosaur dragon thingy. Okay, here we go. In reference to the Goblin Shopkeeper, I was just riffing on the classic fantasy where a strange being turns up out of the blue and offers PCs a few items for sale. Okay, well, part of my reaction is I don't perceive goblins in that way. I would see gnomes in that way, but that's my perception. And I just finished again reading Pratchett's Discworld novel, Snuff. And to a point, that's sort of how goblins are considered in a world that I would set up as being just a couple of levels above vermin. But in the book, they show that that's not necessarily. So that's partly my thing. And he goes and say, he wasn't trying to say that'd be a normal encounter. And then even put a bunch of crappy stuff in there, so you weren't likely to get a good deal anyway. Anyway, thanks for your ideas. I really like the example of dungeon settings. I don't think folks really pay enough heed to the meaning of the word dungeon, which actually offers mind-nauseating realities to the concept of mega dungeons. I mean, the king that had 10 or more levels of prisons and torture facilities is just a dick. A king dick, if you will. Bad mojo. No wonder his kingdom fell into ruin. Okay. Pardon me. I don't know if this question is a joke or somebody that just really doesn't know. I think my correct response to this next one would be go ahead, pull the other one that has bells on. The question is, what part of RPG history would you like to learn more about? None. I was kind of there. That's kind of like asking me would I like to learn more about working on a flight deck in a wartime situation with live ammo. What would I like to learn more about? No, none, thank you. I was there. Don't need to learn anything else. And then a follow-up was, if you could interview or talk to anyone, living or dead, about a period of RPG history, who would they be and why would they be of interest to you? The only one that I would like to really talk to would be M.A.R. Barker. And I'd like to find out just how much of a hideously racist bigot he was and how it came about. And I would have liked to listen to an hour or two of him talking about himself and telling the world how wonderful he was. And then I'd like to further have him explain to me what the hell the whole thing with Chainmail was and why he felt the need to invent all those languages and then expect game players to learn what all those words meant. I thought Empire of the Paddle Throne was a huge mistake by TSR, and I still do. A tiny niche game that was nearly impossible to get deeply into. We did do some neat things with wipe-off maps and things, but that's the only person I'd want to go back and talk to. I guess, if that was a real question. Chainmail question. Why did enchanted arrows always hit normal targets? What was the rationale or source? Thanks. Okay. Chainmail. Chainmail. I should lean up and go, think back into before there were rules for magic missiles and fireballs and flaming Hoozies and whatever. There was fantasy literature. Enchanted arrows were very special, very rare. Who had enchanted arrows? Elves. Enchanted arrows, being better, were an indication, a reflection of the popular myth that elves were good archers, better archers somehow. More accurate, more deadly, whatever. Chainmail was a set of rules set up for group block battles. There was no individual battling like there is in D&D. There were heroes and superheroes. There was simply one figure that was, in effect, worth many more figures. If a hero had a magic arrow and he shot it at the regular general, it would hit because it's magical. They were not common. They were extremely rare. You didn't see human or dwarven figures shooting magic arrows. It was only elves. Because that's what the lore and the mythology was at the period of time that the rules were formulated and written. That's all. Okay. This, all right. This is a multi-parter. Are alert foes good foes? If a party member or members screw up their stealth roll badly enough, what chance would you give for the monster population to be fully aware of their presence? All right. Now, first off, you're doing something that I don't necessarily get behind, and that's a stealth roll. Now, if in my games a thief, now known as a rogue, were trying to sneak around behind unseen to do something or to strike from behind, which I'm not real happy with either, but then they would have to be rolling against their decks and their special abilities and all that. Not a trait. However, that said, when I have players roll initiative, and that, for surprise, if they roll crappy, they don't surprise anybody and are surprised. That, for me, that's simple and straightforward and easy enough. Now, if, for instance, you were to get immediately into individual combat, where I use a 0 to 9 scale for initiative, and everybody in the adventuring party rolled high numbers, and all the bad guys rolled low numbers, well, the players would be whacked on and possibly riddled or lumped with sling stones or whatever, and stand there and in effect take it. Now, I like to think of my combat as a stroboscopic moment in time, instant in time, and if you mean clattering around in a suit of plate mail and trying to sneak up on something, and the DM determines that they failed miserably, well, they get no chance for surprise, no chance for any pluses to any die rolls, subsequent die rolls, and maybe some minuses. And none of the intended targets are going to be taken by surprise. So if, for instance, they were slightly or the same tough as the group figured, well, if we get surprised, it'll even it out, and they don't, well, then they could be in for a world of pain, and bleeding, and vertigo. If somebody sneaking through the weapons trophy room in the ruined castle knocked a halberd down off the wall, well, that's going to make a hell of a lot of noise, and it's certainly going to take away any advantages you might have had for being sneaky. What limits would I place on how far-reaching this effect would get? Well, if it's something noise like that, as I just described, how far does the noise travel? Based on how loud it was. That's just kind of a rule of thumb that you should know. It's like if you're playing Boot Hill or Crime Nation and Nights at the Dinner Table, how far away can you hear the gunshots? Hear a gunshot, you're immediately on point, on alert. Kind of like that way today too. All right, what effect would this have on the frequency of wandering monsters? If needed to push delvers along, that is. Well, I'm not real big on random, walking around picking their nose monsters. I generally know what's in the ruined area that I've concocted and drawn up, and they may have activities. Certainly they have activities going in and out, getting a food source. So, random, no. Unlucky, yes. Random in that regard, yes. But not just, something showed up around the corner and look at a chart and roll a 10-sider and, it's 3 kobolds. However, I have been known to have things wander around to get the players going, yes. No DM wants to waste precious and glorious playing time when, you hear some shuffling down the hall, we'll get them to book off and get going and play again. Is it manipulative? Yes. But as long as you don't have to actually attack them with whatever it is there is, or you don't attack them with anything that's going to hurt them a whole lot, it's for their own good, right? What does alertness really confer to foes? Well, the alertness. I make a lot of basic assumptions of things in running my games, particularly the wheel. In that, I tell them at the very beginning, you're experienced, have lived this long. I assume that you're going to have the normal stuff: some rope and some pitons and a hammer, and and a chisel and whatever within the reasonable packing, iron rations, and then anything odd that you want. Those things you have to write down on your sheet. I assume they've got oil and torch and whatever, because that's minutia, and that gets in the way of playing the game. Because my game's a one-off always. Gonna do another one on the 10th. Let's see, am I missing anything? No. Alertness is not playing with your head up your ass. Now, if something is in a ruin or a dungeon, and I'm just going to use dungeon as a generic term where you're going to possibly go confront something or retrieve something or whatever, if their alertness, I would put on a scale of their intelligence as a species or as individuals. If you're going to have three humans, roll 6-siders, 3 6s 3 times, and get their intelligence and see if they're smart, dumb, average, easy peasy. The oddball stuff is what makes the game fun. If you didn't have the oddball stuff, where would all the fun and the laughs come in? And so I make them write down the oddball stuff. And often as not, some of the oddball stuff proves to be very, very handy and very effective in unforeseen ways. The obstacles, the foes, I would just have an alert status that would be certainly in the beginning of an adventure. You're just arriving at a ruin or whatever. Their alertness would be rather low because they'd feel at home and at ease and secure until you did something, were discovered, broke something, left a track, whatever, and then the alertness would go up. Now, if you're trying to break into the Archmage's inner sanctum and steal the opal as big as a baby's head, well, you got to figure that he's got some pretty active wards on it, and anybody he hires is going to be real alert. It's one of the things I think is pretty easy to apply common sense to, extrapolate from every day. How alert? The guy that's schlepping around the factory with that round clock thing slung over his shoulder has to go around and get the keys, click, click, to show he's making his rounds. How alert is he? If somebody's gotten in and they're lurking in the shadows. New guy on the job might be really alert. Guy been doing it for years, less. I think that should just be sort of a common sense thingy. All right, we got Labor Day coming up, so don't labor. Enjoy the weekend. Think about being a Patreon supporter. I think I may have located a green screen background, so I may take suggestions on what you think ought to be behind me besides these tacky rocks. And let's see, what else? This Saturday, I'm doing a Q&A for the Nines at 9:30. And that's it until next week. Dodata Govi. Hello, and welcome to my cellar.
The Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory, Titan with tramp under a tree,
High as could be. He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.